Let's talk about an event that, in just 6 short years, completely redrew the map of the world and changed the course of human history forever. We're diving into the story of the Second World War. But before we get into any of the politics or the battles, we have to start with the most important number of all, over 70 million. That's how many people, soldiers and civilians, lost their lives. It is the deadliest conflict in all of human history, and that staggering number really frames everything else we're about to discuss.
So how on earth did the world get to such a catastrophic point? Well, the answer isn't simple. It was really a perfect storm of unresolved anger, economic desperation, and some truly dangerous new ideologies. To really understand the start of World War II, we actually have to go backwards to the end of World War I. You see, the peace treaty that was signed was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But it was so deeply flawed that it did the exact opposite. It basically planted the seeds for an even bigger, deadlier conflict.
The real heart of the problem was the Treaty of Versailles. The intention might have been peace, but the terms were just crushing. Germany was forced to take all the blame for the First War, pay these crippling reparations that absolutely wrecked its economy, and give up huge chunks of territory. This didn't create peace, it created a deep, simmering national resentment.
And all of that resentment was like dry tinder, just waiting for a spark. And into that void stepped these charismatic, ruthless dictators. We're talking about totalitarian leaders like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who just masterfully exploited all that public anger. They promised to restore national pride, fix the economy, and their promises were backed by this aggressive desire to expand their empires, which set them on a collision course with the rest of the world.
So as all these tensions just boiled over, the world basically fractured into two opposing teams. Let's take a quick look at who is on each side. Okay, so on one side, you had the Axis powers. This was an alliance built on aggression and expansion, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. And then, squaring off against them, were the Allied powers. This was a massive, and let's be honest, sometimes an uneasy coalition that eventually brought together nations like the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and of course the United States.
And make no mistake, this was a world war, in every sense of the word. The fighting wasn't just stuck in Europe. Battles were raging across the deserts of North Africa, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and the enormous Pacific Ocean. It touched nearly every continent on the planet.
Now, a war that lasts for 6 years isn't just one single event. It's really a series of critical turning points that completely shifted the momentum and, in the end, decided who would win. The whole thing really escalated through a few key moments. It all kicked off in Europe in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Then, the entire game changed in 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor woke up the sleeping giant, bringing America's incredible industrial power into the war. And by 1944, the Allies launched the massive D-Day invasion, which really was the beginning of the end for Germany, leading to their surrender in 1945.
You know, we always think about the soldiers on the front lines, but this war was what they called a total war, and that means it completely upended the lives of regular, everyday people back home. It demanded huge sacrifice and incredible resilience from everyone.
Imagine your daily life just transformed. Simple things like food and gas were strictly rationed. To escape the constant threat of bombs, millions of children were evacuated from the cities out to the countryside. And with so many men away fighting, women stepped into factories in huge numbers, becoming the absolute backbone of the war effort and changing society forever.
So after 6 incredibly long and brutal years, the war was finally drawing to a close. But its end would kick off a brand new, uncertain era and leave behind a legacy that, honestly, we are still grappling with today. The end of the war really came in 2 stages. First, in Europe. After Hitler's death, Germany finally surrendered in May of 1945. But the war in the Pacific was still raging. Then, in August, the world changed forever. The United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Faced with this weapon of unimaginable power, Japan surrendered, finally bringing the Second World War to an end. And that brings us right back to where we started. That number, 70 million. By the time it was all over, that was the final toll, the single deadliest conflict in the history of our species, a number that just demands that we try to understand what happened next. Out of the ashes of this global catastrophe,
A new world really did begin to take shape. I mean, entire cities were just rubble. But there was also this powerful, shared feeling that a disaster like this could never, ever happen again. This led to a whole new emphasis on international cooperation and, most importantly, the creation of a brand new global institution.
And that institution, of course, was the United Nations. It was formed in 1945, and its mission was crystal clear: to be a place for diplomacy, to maintain peace and security, and to make sure a catastrophe like World War II could never happen again.
So the United Nations was literally born from the wreckage of this war, with a clear goal of preventing another one. And that leads us to a question that's just as relevant today as it was back in 1945. Has it actually succeeded in its mission? Now that's a question really worth thinking about.